welcome to another Game Nexus arcade video. Today we're going to be taking another look at Virtua Fighter, released on the Sega Model 1 hardware in 1993. This time I will be playing as Pai Chan instead of Sarah Bryant. And of course I've said it enough last time, but this is a really great game that I really highly recommend. If you can find an arcade unit or anywhere to play this in its original form as you see here, I would really recommend this because, as I'd mentioned last time, none of the ports really do this game justice because it just doesn't look too nice on any of the versions. Sega Saturn version notwithstanding, which is actually pretty decent, it just never got ported too well. And I get a lot of flack from people saying that this game just doesn't look too great. But it's one of those things. This game was made in 1993, when 3D was in its infancy. And instead of being rendered in, like, texture-mapped triangles, which a lot of stuff was done in, this game was, basically rendered as flat-shaded quads. So that's why the graphics look the way they do, and that's why they had to be rendered this way. And of course, what you ended up getting was, on your console versions, they had to just change the graphics a little bit. The big thing I always make mention of is if you notice in the intro, which I will eventually be posting a video where I have the Sega Saturn and the arcade intros next to each other, but the biggest thing is at the end when it pans around Akira Yuki. He squeezes his hands and you can see all 5 fingers animate, whereas in the Sega Saturn version, he has what a lot of people like to refer to as Lego Man hands, which they look like either a Lego Man or, if you've ever seen a character from a playset called Playmobil, yeah, they have the same kind of, basically a thumb and the fingers are all just like one continuous hand. Now, the original Model 1 arcade version, which we're seeing here right now, each of the 3D characters are made up of about 2,000 flat-shaded polygons here, while the ground used about 220 polygons. Akira used about 2,300, while Doral uses about 2,600, which is something that I think to myself is a bit strange, because Doral doesn't look all that great in this. She looks kind of like a weird mannequin. Thus, the game renders at least 5,420 polygons per frame, pushing approximately 162,600 polygons per second, which is 30 frames per second, which is what this game runs at. I think my upscalers actually kind of push it to 60 frames per second, but of course you're not getting any extra frame data than you would if you were just playing this normally. And one thing I will make mention of, which I'm sure I made mention of in other videos, but this game can be pretty brutally hard, so whenever you hear that like little chirp between rounds, that means it's a round I continued. Which, I'll be 100% honest, the only rounds I didn't continue were Jackie and Jeffrey. I actually got through both of those characters without losing once. But the rest of the characters I actually had to continue a few times on with. I think it was this fight you see here, Pai Chan, being the most, because I probably made it mentioned in multiple videos of mine, but I'm not great at mirror matches because the AI knows all the moves and can pull them off without having to input a button combination, so they end up like doing what you were going to do before you even think about it. And now, one of the things that they always say, this is the first full 3D fighting game, which of course it is. Before this, there was a game called Dark Edge by Sega on the System 32 hardware, which kind of used sprites and textures, and it had a weird viewpoint that it manipulated the way that everything was displayed, so it kinda looked 3D, but it wasn't like actually fully rendered 3D polygons like this. And now here's the next character, Wolf Hawkfield. And when he does his wins, he always, I probably have made mention of this in other games, but in this one it's more extreme than the others, but he does a howl, which no matter what, I always think is kind of weird. And if you're curious to see how like long it took me to get through the rounds, just look at that time clock in the corner of the screen when it goes from round to round, and that'll tell you how long it took me to get through each character. But I just want to show you basically a brief glimpse of this game played with another character, and while I'm not the best at Pai Chan, I've actually picked up a few of her moves because I have that Sega Saturn strategy guide which tells me how to play the different moves, and luckily when they translated this from from Model 1 to Saturn, they actually kept just about all the moves the same, so the Sega Saturn strategy guide actually works pretty well. It's not like sometimes where they take the arcade game and put it on the console and they change everything, so you have to buy the strategy guide for the console, which that's one thing to make mention of. You'll notice a lot if you're actually looking for strategy guides like on eBay or various other sites, but the strategy guides were often released for the arcade version in Japan, whereas here in America, that's kind of unheard of, where people would actually buy a strategy guide to play the arcade version. And I have to say, a few times if you see some of these rounds, I honestly get very lucky. Like, I'm watching the footage I'm seeing right now, I'm thinking to myself, I was thinking to myself earlier, how in the world am I going to beat him? But it looks like I just kind of got lucky where he just didn't hit me. And now it goes without saying, I know I've said this in numerous Virtua Fighter videos, but Akira is always the hardest. Be it Virtua Fighter 2, which I could remember, I think it took a whole, like, 10 minutes or more. It looks like it only took me about 6 minutes to beat him here. And more or less what ends up happening when you play these characters so many times in a row, you end up finding little, like, openings that you can hit them on. And while the combo system in the original Virtua Fighter here does not flow as well as, say, even Virtua Fighter 2 or of course, my big entry into the series where I played it the most was Virtua Fighter 4, because I feel that the combo system really took off in that game. Not to say that it wasn't bad in the earlier games, but it just seemed to really get really good when it came to Virtua Fighter 4. But you really have to figure out the way to play the game when you're playing this one. And now, as I mentioned earlier, it said that Dural was made of 2,600 polygons. The only thing I could think of is since Dural has to have all these joints and everything, whereas the regular characters, they're wearing clothes, so their joints don't have to be as defined as Dural's. Like, you can see she has, like, her knee joints are tighter and everything. The features of her body are a bit more tight, so that's probably why she has a higher polygon count. And one thing that was always a challenge for me when I was playing as Pai Chan here is like getting through rounds without her hat being knocked off. That was always the thing. I think there was a couple rounds in this whole playthrough that I actually got through without Pai Chan's hat getting knocked off. And I can remember that was one of those big things that a lot of people thought was one of the coolest things, is that you had this character, and there was actually a clothing item that could be knocked off, which later games such as Virtua Fighter 2 and even the Dead or Alive series took and ran with. I think it was the first time I actually faced Doral as Sarah. Is the only time I actually beat Doral in this game. I've only ever faced Doral once in Virtua Fighter 2, I think. Or it might have been twice, but I think it was only that one time, which is the one you saw in the arcade video. And that time, of course, I lost. And of course, this is the really cool ending bit. Which I would imagine these are probably the same credits as the credited intro. But yeah, Virtua Fighter is an awesome fighting game. Unfortunately, it's still not emulated quite right. So I would highly recommend, if you know an arcade that has this, or if you somehow could be like me and get the actual board, it's highly recommended play. It's really a really fun game, and unfortunately the home versions do not do it justice. And here again you can see how I beat Akira. They just don't show a replay of Doral. And the funny thing is, if I turn the arcade board on again, it'll show this same thing, but it'll show it in Jackie's stage. It always just does that. It shows the last character fighting in Jackie's stage. Well, that's another Game Nexus arcade video, and I shall see you later. Bye.